Thebes, 1400 years before Christ. A girl lies in silence beneath a canopy of perfumed linen, her wrists crossed gently over her chest as if preparing for burial. Tonight marks her passage into womanhood, not through joy or love, but through a ritual older than memory. She has bathed in oils, she has fasted for 3 days. She has been told she is to become divine. But when the priest enters her chamber with 2 attendants and a golden blade meant for blessing, she realizes something unspoken. This ceremony is not for her soul, it is for her body. They told her not to speak. From the moment her mother wept and braided her hair in silence that morning, the command had been passed without words. A bride who speaks on the night of her ritual shames her house. That is what they said, whispered behind walls, layered beneath prayers. Her name was Merit. She was 13. She had not seen her husband's face. He was 30 years older, a high official with a scar on his lip and 6 children from his dead wife. But the ritual must be performed, and Merit must obey. She had been wrapped in white linen that clung to her thin frame like damp shrouds. Her breasts were barely risen, her hips narrow as a reed, yet they painted her eyes with kohl, laced her mouth with scented resins, and laid her on a bed she had never slept in. When the hour came, a servant lit the lotus oil lamp and stepped out. The door closed with a heavy thud, and she was alone until he arrived. But it was not just him. 2 elder witnesses entered behind him, one a temple scribe, the other a priest. They said nothing. They sat in the corner like carved gods. He knelt beside her. He did not say her name. He lifted her veil and studied her as if inspecting grain. Then the priest approached and pressed a bronze amulet against her forehead. It burned, not with fire, but with something older. The smell of bloodless metal, the murmur of chants outside, the sensation of her own heartbeat rising without consent, and when the act began, she closed her eyes. She did not cry out, she did not turn away, she did as she was told. She endured it as a rite, not of passage, but of possession. When it was over, the witnesses left without looking at her. Her husband tied a knot of red thread at the base of the bed and muttered a phrase she did not understand. Then he left too. The room was silent once more. Only the oil lamp still burned. And Merit, naked beneath the ritual cloth, stared at the ceiling of painted stars, her lips pressed tight in obedience. She had become a woman, they would say, but she felt nothing, only the echo of footsteps, and the distant ache of something sacred turned to ash. The witnesses did not blink. They sat like statues in the shadows, veiled in linen, their heads shaved smooth, their hands folded neatly over their laps. Merit had heard of them, men appointed by the temple to verify sacred unions, to ensure that the ritual of flesh was completed properly and without deceit. No union was holy unless seen. That was the rule. It was said they were chosen for their silence, for their blindness to shame. But when Merit turned her head, just for a moment, she caught one of them watching her, not with piety, but with hunger dulled by duty. She turned her gaze back to the ceiling and swallowed hard. This had been done for centuries, they claimed, in the royal courts of Memphis, in the temple houses of Heliopolis. Brides of noble blood were not merely wives. They were vessels of the gods, their purity a matter of state. A defiled union meant a defiled kingdom. So the watchers came. Some carried tablets, others sealed jars of red wine to pour at the end. Not in celebration, but in sealing. Merit had not known they would be there. Her mother had not spoken of it. Her older sister, who had vanished into marriage 2 years before, had said nothing. The silence had been inherited like jewelry. And so when they entered, she did not scream. She only turned her face toward the linen sheets and focused on the stitched patterns of lotus and reed. Her husband made no apology for them. He undressed without haste, spoke only once to the scribe, then approached her body as though approaching a throne, something beautiful, but built for use. The priest in the corner began to chant. It was not a prayer. It was an incantation, a string of words meant to tie spirit to flesh, to bind the house of the woman to the lineage of the man. When the ritual ended, the watchers stood, made their marks on a scroll, and left as they had come, quiet, expressionless, indifferent. They had done their duty. They had seen. And now she was sealed. like a vessel filled and corked. Later, when she was alone again, she touched her abdomen with one hand, trying to feel something divine, something sacred, but all she felt was air and skin. No holiness had entered her. Only the sense that her body had been borrowed, inspected, used, and returned to her altered. Outside her chamber, the temple bells began to toll. Another girl would be waiting in another room, another pair of eyes would be watching, and none of their names would ever be written. Only the scrolls would remain signed, witnessed, approved. She had once dreamed of the temple as a place of light, columns rising like sunbeams, incense curling like breath from the gods. But when they took her there, she realized the truth was quieter, darker. There were no songs, no feasts, only long corridors of limestone and eyes that did not blink. The women who served inside the temple did not smile. They walked with bare feet and downcast gazes, each one clothed in linen so sheer it may as well have been mist. These were the temple virgins, sworn not to men but to gods. That was the story told in the scrolls. But behind the veils and the chants, another truth pulsed like a hidden vein. The girls were not offered, they were exchanged, sometimes for favor, sometimes for grain, sometimes for the illusion of holiness wrapped around the sharp edge of a political bargain. Merit was not yet a wife when they led her into the house of Amun. Her father had made a pledge, a sacred gift, to ensure the Nile would rise, the crops would grow, and the gods would remain pleased. But the gods did not walk the earth. Their priests did, and it was the priests who entered the sanctum at dusk, after the outer gates had closed and the oil lamps had been lit. One by one, the girls would kneel before the altar, arms raised, linen lowered, skin kissed by myrrh and fear. The ritual was not called defilement, it was called union. They said the god entered the girl through the body of his chosen servant. They said the girl was blessed. Merit did not feel blessed. She felt watched. She felt counted. She felt reduced to a channel through which power flowed but never stayed. After the ritual, she was not allowed to speak of it. Her hair was cut short. Her meals were rationed. She was given new robes and a new name that meant nothing. Her body, once her own, was now temple property, and when blood marked her linen on the seventh day, it was collected, sealed, and burned as offering. No one touched her shoulder. No one whispered comfort. She sat in the garden that night and stared at the sacred pool, watching the moon ripple in broken circles. In the morning, the high priest would declare the blessings fulfilled. Her family would be praised. The gods would be appeased. But Merit would remain behind the walls, one more girl who mistook ritual for meaning. And though the scrolls would record the offerings, the ceremonies, the signs in the sky, no ink would ever name her. She would fade from memory like incense smoke, holy in word, forgotten in truth. They called it preservation, a sacred preparation to ensure that no man but her husband would ever open her. But it was not preservation. It was intrusion disguised as protection. Before Merit could be married, before her body could be claimed, she had to be sealed. The ritual was held in a chamber beneath the temple courtyard, lit by blue oil lamps and the silence of women too old to speak their memories aloud. 3 elder priestesses performed the rite. None of them looked at her. One washed her legs with honeyed water. Another rubbed her thighs with powdered resin from the sycamore tree, murmuring that the goddess Hathor once used the same. The third unwrapped a scroll and began to chant. It was not a hymn, it was a list. A long, slow recitation of names and curses of women who had dishonored their house, of virgins who had bled too early, of wives who were found wanting. As the chant thickened in the air, the priestesses began their work. Linen was folded into narrow strips and soaked in a mixture of palm gum and fig oil. One by one, the strips were twisted, pressed, and inserted. Merit winced, but did not cry out. A girl who cried was a girl who doubted the gods. And there was no room for doubt in the house of life. When the final strip was in place, the lead priestess took a small bronze amulet shaped like a lotus bud and pressed it to her navel. It burned cold, a sealing, a marking, a vow. They said the linen would protect her, that the gum would guard her, that any man who broke the seal too soon would bring curse upon his house. But Merit knew better. She had heard the whispers of girls torn open too quickly, of blood that stained not only the sheets but the walls, of husbands who cursed their brides for being human. After the ritual, she was told not to bathe for 7 days. Her legs were bound together at night so the linen would not shift. She was not allowed to walk far, not allowed to squat, not allowed to laugh. Holiness required stillness. Purity required silence. She lay on her side in the dark for nights uncounted, listening to the footsteps of others above her, girls walking toward the same fate, mothers praying in courtyards, priests arguing in halls. When she was finally summoned for her wedding, she could no longer tell if the pain between her legs was physical or imagined. She only knew that she was ready, not for love, not for joy, but for proof, for inspection. For the moment her husband would unwrap her like a relic and search for the seal, and when he found it, he would smile not at her, but at the priest who had placed it. The linen had to be stained. That was the law, though no one ever called it law aloud. It was simply known, as old as the river, as fixed as the flood. After the wedding night, a strip of white linen folded, placed beneath the bride, must be brought forth by dawn, not to be washed, not to be hidden, but to be examined. By elders, by priestesses, by family, by fate. Blood meant honor. Blood meant truth. Blood meant the gods had seen and approved. But what if there was none? What if the seal broke too soon, or not at all? Merit lay awake long before the sun rose, her fingers curled around the linen that bore her shame. There had been pain, yes, but no sign, no blooming of red, no proof. Her husband had fallen asleep without a word, his back turned toward her, his breath thick with beer. The moment he finished, he rose, muttered something about duty, and doused the flame. She had lain there, stiff and cold, as the oil smoke thinned into nothing. When she rose in the pale hour before dawn, the cloth beneath her thighs was clean, not spotless, not divine, just clean, and clean was dangerous. In the silence of the chamber, she remembered what an older servant once told her in a whisper behind the temple ovens. If the cloth is too clean, make it speak. That woman had been clever. She'd pricked her own finger and pressed it to the center. Just enough, not too much, not too little, but not every girl had that choice. Some were watched too closely. Others trembled so much they could not hold the needle. One bled too much and was hidden for weeks. Another disappeared entirely. The sun rose. The footsteps came. The priestess entered, head bowed, hands gloved. She said nothing. She reached for the cloth. Merit hesitated, then handed it over. Her palms were damp, her throat dry. The priestess unfolded the linen, looked, folded it again, and walked away. No cry, no question. No mark on her face to show belief or doubt. Merit stood alone, her body trembling with something worse than fear, uncertainty. Outside, the courtyard bells rang in celebration. Another union blessed, another house secured. But the cloth was gone, and with it, her fate. Later that day, as she sat by the window, watching birds move across the temple roof, her husband returned. He said only one sentence, "They are satisfied." Then he left again. That was all. No touch, no praise, no kindness, only the sentence. And the silence that followed it. Somewhere, in some hidden place, the cloth was being placed into a jar, sealed with wax, labeled with a symbol. It would sit on a shelf among hundreds, never to be opened again. But it would be remembered, not for what it meant, but for what it claimed. She was never meant to be remembered. That was the cruelest part. Not the silence, not the pain, not even the rituals that carved obedience into her bones. It was the forgetting, the deliberate erasure. Merit had fulfilled every role given to her. Bride, vessel, proof. And yet, no scribe ever etched her name into limestone. No priest ever spoke her lineage aloud in ceremony. She moved through the palace like a shadow draped in linen, always behind the wives who bore sons, always beneath the servants who whispered stories of goddesses and queens. But she was neither, only a body offered, examined, and passed through the ancient machinery of power. She tried once, quietly, to ask her mother why it had been this way, why no one had told her what the temple truly required. why her wedding had felt like a burial. Her mother only looked away, eyes rimmed with old coal, mouth drawn like a sealed jar. It was the same for me, she said, and for mine before me. No further words. Just the silence passed down like inheritance. In time, Merritt learned to walk without being heard, to speak only when spoken to carry the grace of a statue still, smooth, unreadable. But in her chest, something remained. Not rebellion, not fire, something smaller, like a spark hidden inside stone. On the day her first daughter bled for the first time, she did not send for the priest. She did not mark the date on a scroll. She took the girl to the banks of the Nile before dawn, where papyrus reeds swayed like secret prayers. They sat together in the hush of morning, and for the first time in her life, Merritt told a story, not of gods, not of kings, but of herself, not every detail. Just enough for the girl to understand that her body was not an altar, that silence was not holiness. That pain was not proof of worth. The girl listened without blinking, her small hands curled in her lap. When the sun rose, they returned home, and no one asked where they had been. That night, Merritt lit no oil lamp. She lay awake watching shadows move across the ceiling, wondering if her story would survive the generations, or dissolve like so many others. Perhaps no temple would record her. No statue would bear her likeness, but her daughter knew, and maybe that was enough. In a kingdom ruled by memory and myth, even a whisper could be a form of resistance. Even a forgotten girl could leave a scar on history, quiet, invisible, permanent. She was never meant to be remembered, but you remember her now. If you believe stories like Merritt's still matter, subscribe. And tell me in the comments which state or country you're watching from. I read them all.